The grounding
it's a position
of any ethical responsibility is ultimately based in the historical development. Is it not obviously more responsible to see that a social safety net that upholds the living standards of my fellow citizens is in place than I am to ensure that a comparable safety net extends to the totality of humanity? And besides, it's not a decision that's made in a room. It's a decision that has to be the culmination of a political process endorsed by the people who will bear the costs of it. And to tell them that they should think in global terms and not in terms of their families, their neighbors, and their compatriots is easy to say and tyrannical to impose on them against their will.
What's your take on immigration? Because I think we have different views. So basically, I view immigration as the harvest of empire. If you're going to be the global hegemon, and you're going to have bases around the world, and you're going to have dollar hegemony, and you're going to destroy the economies of other countries, you're going to get immigrants. So to me, that's the fundamental ethical question. And therefore, you have to accept those immigrants because you have destroyed their lives. Even if it does, show that it
I would
prices.
question the causality. I understand that there are legitimate questions about American imperial footprint.
Vis-a-vis Mexico, Glenn, come on. We have been dominating that economy
Venezuela,
for centuries.
China, a lot of those people crossing the border without authorization are not from Mexico. They're from all over.
Where's the majority from?
And I think probably more than that, they're coming from Central America, Latin America.
So Mexico and Central America.
Mexico. They have to go through Mexico from Nicaragua or El Salvador.
Those Nicaragua, how many times has the United States invaded and occupied Nicaragua in the 20th century?
And therefore, the United States is responsible to take the overflow of people who want to escape the consequences of that because there was no agency on the part of these countries. The United States is the master of the board here.
The United States is a structuring condition. It's the sun of the solar system of international relations. And so obviously these planets have their own trajectories. But yes, the United States absolutely has an ethical responsibility if it's going to decide to dominate the world.
I don't know where that comes from. An ethical responsibility? I think
if you're going to, we could have
perhaps they should, but we have our own interests. And my view is you have a country, you have a border, you have the integrity of deciding who comes into your country or not. You lose control of that.
So that's a more important issue than because these are, it's just, that's obviously like nation states have borders and this is something that nation states do. But to me, it really is like how you're going to place the ethical consideration. Right? What is the cost of the empire? If you're going to decide to economically dominate Central America and North America for centuries, how does that not come across with an ethical responsibility to the people that you are dominating and controlling? Who then want to come to the hegemon?
My ethical responsibility is to my citizens, not to people in other lands who speculatively, on your theoretical argument, are forced into a migratory stance by my actions.
So then the ethical responsibility of the nation supersedes the ethical responsibility to the human.
The grounding
it's a position
of any ethical responsibility is ultimately based in the historical development. I am obviously, is it not obviously more responsible to see that a social safety net that upholds the living standards of my fellow citizens is in place than I am to ensure that a comparable safety net extends to the totality of humanity. And besides, it's not a decision that's made in a room. It's a decision that has to be the culmination of a political process endorsed by the people who will bear the costs of it. And to tell them that they should think in global terms and not in terms of their families, their neighbors, and their compatriots is easy to say and tyrannical to impose on them against their will.
I have a question then. There are other ways then to make wages higher than reducing immigration, arguably more effective ways like raising the minimum wage or taxing the extraordinarily wealthy. Why not do those as opposed to cutting off that's what I never understood. Because it's not like there are not ways to make society more equal and more equitable. But why focus on the immigrant? Which to me seems like actually like not the most effective ways to do things like raise.
This is not unique to the United States and its position as an imperial master. We see concerns about immigration all over. What's going on in the United Kingdom? What's going on in Germany? What's going on in Netherlands? What's going on in France?
Well, exactly. All the countries you picked are the countries of the Western hegemony that has dominated the world through the last 500 years of colonialism. And again, the harvest of empire.
Well,
That's what I would say to that.
The wealth of these countries, the prosperity of these countries is not an appropriation from the rest of the world, entitling the rest of the world to free entry into them. It's a little bit more complicated than that, isn't it, Danny?
It's sure more complicated, but there's also truth to Wallerstein. I mean, world systems theory is not ipso facto incorrect. There's a lot of reality, to me at least, empirically and historically.
I want to know where your should comes from. I mean, even if I grant you, and I'm not granting you, the causal analysis world system, we're responsible for this or that. Where does the should come from? What's the position on high from which you render an ethical judgment about that?
Well, I think that's true of any ethical judgment that anyone ever renders. It's ultimately a should. I mean, now we're just talking philosophy, but I'm a humanist. Fundamentally.
It's not just philosophy. It is philosophy, but it's not just philosophy.
Well, in terms of the ethical ranking, right? Like you could make various arguments, but I mean,
what
many
you
Jews
touched on, is
history,
it a John Rawls kind of thing, a theory of justice kind of thing? I mean, what's the
I don't even think you need
for
Rawls.
the should?
Ethical humanism. I mean, Jewish cosmopolitanism. I mean, this is a classic, thing that Jews developed over the course of the 19th and 20th centuries as they were excluded from European societies. I think ultimately that's where my ethical position is grounded in the experience of diasporic Jewry and not being part of the political community for many, many years, even though now we definitely are part of the political community. But that's where the grounding comes from. It doesn't really come from the liberal political philosophy of, the veil of ignorance of John Rawls. It comes from the historical experience of the Jewish diasporic people, of being people on the outside and being people who are oppressed. That's where it comes from. Ethical humanism.
Why do I not see more? Why do I not see more expression of that Jewish sensibility in the policies of the state of Israel?
I think because that is a great question, and I would say there is a significant divergence between diasporic Jewry and the ethno-national Judaism that has arisen in the state of Israel. One thing that I say is like diasporic cosmopolitanism is the best thing the Jews came to the world. I mean, I think this is an inevitable outcome of being an ethno-state. And there are historical reasons for why Jews believed in the wake of the Holocaust that they needed to construct an ethno-state. And I don't think that it is easy to dismiss those reasons in 2024 when Israel is very powerful. It's not so wild in the late 1940s or early 1950s to understand why the Jewish people of Europe felt that they needed to have their own ethno-state. But I think it's essentially that. It's a feeling of the exact type of thing, but channeled in another direction. I think this is quite interesting because precisely what you're saying is correct. I think the experience of Jews in Europe led to very different outcomes. You have like the cosmopolitanism, the humanism of a Karl Popper. You have the embrace of capitalism of a George Soros, because in capitalism, you're able to, in some sense, shed your identity because it just matters how much money you make. And then you have the embrace of ethno-nationalism by people who founded the state of Israel, David Ben-Gurion or Theodor Herzl. And you have other reactions as well. And I think that cauldron of experience of Jewish oppression has led to a lot of the major philosophies of the 20th century to emerge. And people have different choices.
Not just Jewish philosophies, major. Have you ever read this book by a guy called Cudahy called The Ordeal of Civility?
No, I haven't read it, no.
The Ordeal of Civility. You talk about it. Cudahy is the last name. I don't remember the first name. But in any case, it's a study of Marx, Freud, and Levi-Strauss. An economist, a psychologist, and an anthropologist. And The Ordeal of Civility is a story of the modernization of the Jewish experience in Europe and how the various conflicts that emerged for that process of modernization filtered through the thinking of these great founding theorists of their respective disciplines in discernible ways. That's the argument of Cudahy in that book. But I'm reminded of it by what you say.
I did hear about it, and I heard about it from you. And he's conservative, right? This is like early 70s. Yeah. There's like a little bit 70s. There's a racial tinge, if I recall, when I looked into this. Like that would make us a bit uncomfortable. But I mean, you get an argument similarly from Yuri Slezsky and much more recently, The Jewish Century, right? Which is talking about how this experience of Europe essentially led to these modern philosophies. But just to bring it back to the conversation, that's where my philosophy comes from.
John Murray Cudahy.
Yeah.
a very Irish Catholic name.
Yeah.